Welcome to Shakey's podcast. Thank you for joining me. Just a solo mission today, no guest on the podcast. And the reason for that is I have decided to record this today to address the past 3 years of my life on a personal basis, and as well as touching on some issues that have taken place around the world in the past 3 years, mainly addressing the issue of the ongoing genocide that is taking place in Palestine. I will come on to that later in the recording. But I'm going to start by talking about the fact that 3 years ago, I was one of two whistleblowers who spoke out in Scottish cricket, and alongside ex-Cricket Scotland internationalist and leading wicket taker Majid Haq, we spoke about our experiences as people of colour playing for Cricket Scotland and how we felt we were not treated the same. What followed was, around 3 years ago, was a live press conference delivered to national press in Stirling, where Cricket Scotland were found and deemed to be undeniably institutionally racist. I was also there in attendance that day, alongside fellow whistleblower Majid Haq and our legal representation, Amar Anwar, who we are forever indebted to for having his support at such a difficult time in life. And I believe that day our lives changed and probably will never be the same after that. And I will go on to say why in this recording. So, walked out of the press conference, felt like that was a moment where, change was going to come, not just in cricket, but in all Scottish sports. Although I knew it wasn't going to happen overnight, I still hoped that this would kind of be the start of that. And I truly believe if you can tackle the issues of racism, institutional racism in sports, it can have a massive impact on society as well. So that was my hope. What followed for me personally was constant barrage of online abuse, which still takes place on a daily basis to this day. Lots of hate, Islamophobia, racism, smear campaigns, just a constant barrage of how two individuals had lied, and that was the reason Cricket Scotland had been deemed to be found institutionally racist, and was all down to us. There was many other people that spoke who were rightfully so given, privacy to do so, and their identities not shared. Although everything has been directed towards the two whistleblowers. Now, I guess that just comes with the territory, to the point that there was a point that I spoke at a race and racism conference at the Emirates Arena in Glasgow. I was the last speaker that day, and I spoke of some of what I've just mentioned, the online hate, the campaigns against you, the blame culture, the denial. And I said that day, and I'm comfortable to continue to say that, I wouldn't encourage anybody to whistleblow. I certainly wouldn't advise my son or daughter to do so, because whistleblowers are not protected. They are left hanging out to dry, and you get two types of people in this. You'll get the institutions and the leaders of these organizations who will try to appease you, try to imply that they are taking this very seriously and they're going to drive change. And it's a lot of empty words and empty statements, but actions don't really back it up. And then you have, you know, people from my community. Now, I actually can connect with both communities from when it comes to this. You know, I have a mixed background. I have a Scottish mother, so I'm half white, and I have a Pakistani father. So I kind of can relate to both, growing up as a Glaswegian in Scotland as well, born and bred. You know, I've got a good understanding of South Asian culture as well as Scottish culture. And I feel like throughout this whole experience, it's just been a focus on the denial, really. I've never really felt people have owned the issues, taken accountability, and really shown action. Unless you're willing to try and help or push something, there is no willingness from the institutions. And then you have people of color, for instance, who I wish to see get equal opportunities. But what a lot of people will do is they will go into these institutions, get roles, get opportunities off the back of other people's trauma. And instead of use that opportunity to drive change, they follow the same procedures that have been in place before just to be able to maintain roles. And that has a negative impact as well. I really want to see people from all backgrounds get equal opportunities, more diversity within institutions like Cricket Scotland, everybody to have equal opportunity, everybody to be treated the same. But you come to learn, and I don't blame these people that go into these institutions, but because it's, if you challenge or if you speak up or if you see something that's not right and you bring it to the leader's attention, your days are numbered. You're seen as a problem. You're seen as somebody that needs to get moved out. I know, because that's what it was like when I was a player with Scottish cricket. If you said something, you were seen as a problem, troublemaker. Let's shift that person out. So I understand why that continues to exist, but that's just going to not take anything forward. People need to feel comfortable to share any issues that they see and for them to be addressed and for them to be heard. And if we continue to have a mindset as people of colour that if we raise our voice, we will not be able to stay in a role, well, that would suggest that that institution still has a lot of work to do before they are deemed to be an institution that is free of all discrimination, hate, and institutional racism. And at this moment in time, I feel that we have gone backwards on that subject and we have gone forwards, and we are 3 years after the report. There has been 3 different leaders at Cricket Scotland since that time. I feel like the leadership has always lacked accountability, honesty, and integrity. I feel that they have focused solely on defending the institution, defending those who have allegations against them, and spending thousands and thousands of pounds in lawyer fees just to try to deflect the attention onto the actual victims. And that is how this is all panned out. It really has panned out like that, to the point recently in media where the referral process which took place, where there was individual cases which came off the back of the report, they took over 2 years. I think it's an absolute disgrace. And I think those who had allegations against them, as well as the victims, all have a right to be extremely annoyed. There was no process followed. It was hideous. It really was hideous. It was a terrible process that in the end, Cricket Scotland just attempted to send letters to people and think that everything was okay and let's move on, even addressing the media to say, you know, we don't want people to speak in public anymore. That's not doing anybody any favours. What they ended up doing in that process was, and I think that was their agenda in some ways, was to fuel the hate even more towards whistleblowers and those who have spoke out. You know, we've been called liars. You know, we hate Scottish cricket. I don't understand how that can be the case when you've played as long as you have for your country and dedicated as much of your time for your country, but that's the feeling, and that's okay. You know, I've come to learn to accept that. I won't stop talking about Scottish cricket. I won't stop supporting Scottish cricket because I have a right to do so. But I'm also not going to stop addressing the clear issues that still exist in an institution like Cricket Scotland. So, you know, during all of this, of all these past few years, I've often wondered why we just can't have some strong leadership, why we can't have people who are really willing to address these issues and put some hard work into it, put some actions into it. You know, the saying, actions speak louder than words. Well, the actions have been extremely, extremely weak to the point now where nobody really knows where the land lies. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of my own personal experience of trying to work with the institution as well and how that all panned out. But before I get to there, I just want to give you an example of what it has been like since speaking out. You know, I mentioned at the start, you know, there's been online abuse, smear campaigns, hate, racism, Islamophobia. I mean, I really don't think people who haven't experienced being in a situation like I or a Majid has will ever understand, because until you're in it, you really can't understand it. It's I really was not set up for it. I mean, you're talking daily abuse on social media. You can block people. They will still find a route through to other people linked to you. They will contact your employers. They will email your employers. I had just started a new job soon after the Changing Their Boundaries report came off. My employers were targeted by online hateful trolls. You know, I did a podcast. If I do a podcast with anybody and my guest shares the podcast, they get targeted by the trolls. It's just a constant vicious cycle that actually brought a lot of pain and misery to my own home. The reason being, my family was getting shared on social media. My children were being spoken of. Pictures of my children shared. My home address even shared on social media. All of this reported to Police Scotland to start with, followed by the case going down to the Metropolitan, still awaiting action over 2.5 years later. And this is another serious issue. I don't know how some people would cope with that. That could drive people to do some really scary things. The level of hate and the level of harassment that was taking place and still is till this day. To the point that, you know, my job that I was trying to do at the time, I just could not function. I couldn't focus on the job. There was too much noise and hate going around me that I couldn't function, and I hit rock bottom. I really hit rock bottom to the point that I took counselling for first time in my life, where, you know, I'd always had a bit of a mindset where, you know, I need to try and figure out my problems myself, you know, work my way through them, be strong. You know, it's easier said than done. And I always felt like counselling wouldn't help. But I think it's very important to put this out to anyone that's struggling, that counselling is good. It allows you to kind of process your thoughts, understand why you're feeling a certain way, and how to also maybe start to take control of these things that are hurting you, and be able to set boundaries that they can't get through to you and cause you as much pain as you're facing. But yeah, extensive counselling just to be able to function and be able to deal with the level of hate that's coming your way. And then when it comes to support, there's been a lot of talk during this about there should be more support for people that speak out, institutions that, you know, should be protecting them. Institutions do not protect them. I don't believe any institution has given us any protection. This has gone to government level. You know, this was national press. And I'm sure, I don't speak for Majid, but I'm sure he would agree that we haven't had very little support from at government level. Sports Scotland have seemed to be supportive, but I don't really know what they've actually done to support extensively. It's all, I feel like a lot of the time it can just be tokenistic gestures. Cricket Scotland, very, very, very little. And then what that does is it has a snowball effect. Because the way I feel now is things could have got better. Things could have been a lot better. But since speaking out, there was 2 players of colour in the men's national team, one of which just recently retired and has now spoken out about feeling the same way. In fact, feeling like since the Changing the Boundaries report came out, things got worse for him. So that worries me and that scares me, because we spoke out for change and for future generations to not feel this way and to feel comfortable and to feel like they can speak and challenge such issues. I now can guarantee, after seeing what has happened to Majid and I, that most people of colour that are playing cricket will now think there's no point speaking out. If I speak out, the same thing will happen to me. So best just keep quiet. And then that doesn't solve any problems. That just makes them worse and worse and worse. And I think that's the direction we're going, especially when you have leadership at Cricket Scotland that have continually pushed this narrative that these are past issues. We don't have these issues anymore. We're still talking about a governing body that are in special measures. Let's not forget that. And to think that within 2 years, 3 years of a report coming out, you are, squeaky clean now and you can just move forward with some smart comms. I mentioned smart comms because I think the leadership of Cricket Scotland now do have some smart comms people within their setup, and that's where their main focus is. Let's get a narrative out there, whereas underneath and behind those comms is a little bit different when it comes to reality of what is really going on within the institution. However, throughout all of that, I've always had a mindset that you have to try and work with people. You have to try and help the cause. I never wished to just be somebody that blew the whistle on an issue or to cause harm to Scottish cricket. I wanted to see things get better, and therefore I was always willing to put my hand forward to try and find a way forward. What I've come to learn is that's very difficult with an institution and a leadership that aren't really wishing to be accountable to what is happening. They are more focused on protecting those who have allegations against them or protecting the institution. That there lies the problem. How do you build trust with people like that? How do you start to move forward? I'm going to give an example of my experience of that. So I've got to know a few leaders since the Changing the Boundaries report that came out 3 years ago about Cricket Scotland, and I found that there really wasn't an appetite to understand the issues or to really address them. There was more focus on, we've moved forward from there, we're fully committed to it. We know what's happened is wrong. It's not happening now. It's that has been the kind of main mindset that's come out of it. However, there's never really been an appetite to actually drive the change, actually connect with communities, actually build trust, actually try to bring people together. In fact, it's become more divisive than ever. And that has been created by leaders. And that is where the buck falls. I always said this, it's the leaders that make the decisions. They're the ones that should set the tone. And leadership are not setting the correct tone, I don't feel. Not so long ago, I decided that I would approach Cricket Scotland to try to start to build relations and move forward again. And I met with leadership on a few occasions. And during those occasions, I felt there was a good conversations. I felt there was a lot of good stuff that came out of those conversations. But what followed off the back of those meetings was never what kind of came across when meeting people in person. There was always I felt like after a bit of time, there was definitely a bit of just trying to appease somebody, just to, but not really taking the person seriously. I also put my name in the hat to commentate. I was doing a lot of work with BBC Sport in Scotland, covering Scottish football. Although I never played football at professional level, played it to a certain age when I was young, but I was doing that and I was doing pretty well in it. And I always wanted to get involved in cricket and have the opportunity to commentate in cricket. So I put my name in the hat and asked if I could have my name put forward to do some commentary. Now, leadership at Cricket Scotland came back to me, and it was all very positive, and even mentioned to me that we had the hopefully soon going to announce that the Australian cricket team were going to come and visit. There was a chance to get involved there. But yes, I was put in touch with the BBC, who I was already doing some work with, and it was agreed that I would commentate on the Cricket Scotland matches and the T20 World Cup out in the Caribbean for BBC Test Match Special. Something I was really excited about, overjoyed about, actually. It was a great opportunity to speak about, to commentate and talk about cricket on the big stage, and to get a chance to commentate on Scotland games, a team that I'd represented myself, was a really special feeling. And I also felt like, I respect the leadership for putting my name in the hat, because nobody has ever given that opportunity before. So I was feeling a little bit positive that, maybe, that I know there was a lot of work to do, but maybe I can start to work more with this leadership. I announced that I was going to be doing it on my social media platforms about a week or so before it. And then everything changed. Everything changed in a kind of a heartbeat. I don't know who. Well, I'm sure I could work out a few individuals, but some people had decided to go and do some digging on my social media and try to find whatever they could against me, to smear and do a campaign against me before I was going to commentate. So we'd come to, I think, a day and a half before I was going to commentate. It's important to announce this, just to say this at this stage. Cricket Scotland never, in the whole time I covered the World Cup, or when it was announced that I was going to do it, ever acknowledged me on any of their platforms, ever linked themselves to me, although I was tagging and linking myself with the organisation, something I feel a little bit embarrassed about now. They did not acknowledge me at all, from when it was announced till when my time finished commentating on the World Cup. So I woke up one morning and I had a few missed calls, and they were from the BBC. So a couple of senior figures in the BBC had contacted me to say that they wished to speak with me regarding some tweets that I had done, as there has been a number of complaints made about the fact that you're going to appear on Test Match Special to cover Scotland in the Cricket World Cup. I asked them, what are the tweets? They said they would prefer if we got in a meeting and we discussed them. So we took a couple of hours, got on this meeting, and senior leadership at BBC, a couple of representatives, brought to my attention that I had sent a tweet not so long after October 7th, where I had mentioned that, don't the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? And I'd also retweeted a picture that had images of Hitler mustaches on Joe Biden, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Rishi Sunak. And I retweeted the picture. perhaps a little bit clumsy with that one, and I'll put my hands up to that. However, what was being brought to my attention was that I was all for what happened on October 7th and innocent civilians dying, because I said Palestine had the right to defend themselves. And by sharing images comparing certain world leaders to Hitler, I was deemed anti-Semitic. And this was a shock to my system because, or sorry, I wasn't deemed anti-Semitic. It was being suggested that I was anti-Semitic. If I had been deemed anti-Semitic and there was proof that I was anti-Semitic against the Jewish faith, which I would never, ever be, I'm sure BBC would not have been having a conversation with me. They would have just been pulling me off the air altogether. But they were not doing that. What followed was, it was kind of a negotiation almost. That's what it felt like. So here I am on the verge of commentating on a World Cup, and the press, it's important that I address it here. The far right press, who were the only outlets that were covering it, were going to run a story later in that day that I had been anti-Semitic or alleged to have been anti-Semitic, and the BBC are being hypocrites because they're not removing me from covering the World Cup, and they removed Michael Vaughan. So comparing me to the Michael Vaughan case. Now, I think it's important for me to say at this point, and this is factually correct because I think it's public knowledge. He tweeted it. Michael Vaughan tweeted that Moeen Ali, the Muslim English cricketer, should go and knock on the doors of all Muslims in the UK and ask them not to be terrorists. Yeah, I would think that's pretty Islamophobic. I have never made any negative reference to the Jewish faith. In fact, I respect Jewish people. They are people of the book. They believe in God, just like I believe in God. There may be differences in our faith, but I've never had any hatred towards the Jewish faith, none whatsoever. And you will never find me saying anything about the Jewish faith. What I do have issues with, and what I did raise my voice about, and I continue to raise my voice about, is the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Now, what happened on October 7th was terrible. Innocent civilians died on that day, and it doesn't matter what background somebody is from, where they are from, what colour their skin is, what religion they are from. Innocent civilians should not be caught in the crossfire of battle, and innocent civilians should not have died. So I condemn what happened on October 7th. And I think it's important also to address that this did not start on October the 7th. This has been happening for some 76 years prior to that, the oppression towards the Palestinian people. Now, what has followed since October 7th? Now, it's also important for me to say at this point, I have tweets, numerous tweets, after October 7th, where I make reference to the fact that I condemn the killings of innocent Israeli civilians, and it shouldn't have happened. So I have it on record. So if I was anti-Semitic and I was against the Jewish faith, and I had hatred towards the Jewish people, which I don't, I would not be condemning that, because people that hate a certain type of people don't really mourn. They don't really care, as is being shown in the world at the moment. Because how can anybody watch babies, children being slaughtered on a daily basis and think that is okay? Whatever side of this you are on, the human side, and humanity should suggest you should condemn any innocent civilians dying, no matter which background they're from. So it's important to say that at this point, that I condemn all innocent civilians that have died. But what is taking place since October 7th I mean, I don't know what the count is at, but my understanding is around, 40,000 plus Palestinian people, innocent civilians have been slaughtered, lost their homes, hospitals have been bombed. Many, many journalists have been killed trying to cover what is going on over there. Doctors and nurses have been killed. That's not okay. And what actually triggered me to send the tweet that talked about, well, don't Palestine have a right to defend themselves? Was I watched an interview with the current Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, where he was on LBC network, and he had said that Israel have a right to defend themselves by any means necessary. And that includes starving the Palestinian people of food, water, and electricity. Now, my understanding is, and I think most people's understanding is that is a war crime. Now, that coming from the mouth of a person who's meant to be a human rights lawyer was very, very triggering. And I tweeted to say, well, don't the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Meaning both sides have a conflict in this, but are Palestine, should they, what about the Palestinian people? That was what I was referring to. Most certainly wasn't referring to the fact that what this tweet and how it was taken out of context, that I was basically saying what happened on October 7th should have happened. And this was right. No, I did not say that. And that's where I guess this smear campaign began and why I was on this call now with BBC leadership. Now, when I started talking about this, I mentioned a negotiation. That's what it felt like. It felt like I was negotiating with BBC leadership. So the BBC leadership had said, we've had these complaints and we don't want to take you off. And I said, well, if I'd been anti-Semitic, you would be taking me off, but I haven't been anti-Semitic. And they were being very careful what they were saying to me, but I said, there's no, and they said, what about if you just say sorry, and that you're going to, do an anti-Semitic course, which, by the way, before we go any further, I would gladly do an anti-Semitic course. I'm always looking to learn more and understand more, just as I would be willing to do an Islamophobic course or whatever it may be. I'm always open to that. But at this moment in time, I was not open to confirming that because I had not actually been anti-Semitic. So it got to the point that I felt I had to say something. There was going to be an article written, so I had a right to respond. And I responded accordingly. And I accepted that the retweet was a bit clumsy on my part. And, that was a slight error on my part, but it wasn't anti-Semitic. I understand why people are so triggered by a discussion on Hitler, because there was many victims during the Holocaust, many, many victims, and I can't comprehend or understand how much pain that has brought on the Jewish community. I never will, and I've always, I was educated on it going through school. I've always felt pain towards what they have suffered. But by comparing the Western leaders who are allowing this to continue to take place against the Palestinian people, where we are watching a genocide unfold in front of our eyes, I felt like that same level of evil was a similar comparison to Hitler. And it wasn't from a point of view of celebrating that fact. It was a point of view of, this is the same evil that we have seen before, and this needs to stop. But I can also understand why discussing Hitler and speaking of him in certain discussions would trigger pain towards the Jewish community, just like I think history will now see the same for the Muslim people with Netanyahu, the Israeli leader. So I just wanted to give a bit of context to it all today. I hope I've given some sort of context to it. Nobody's ever perfect in how they try to explain these things, but that's the truth. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to hide whatsoever. The media has done their best to smear campaign me. Social media and the trolls will continue to do it on a daily basis. They don't harm me anymore. Their words don't get through to me. I am speaking my truth, and I'm very comfortable doing that. So I gave my response, and I was very determined to make sure that there was wording put into that statement that said that I will continue to raise my voice and continue to speak out about the oppression towards the people of Palestine, and for an immediate, and I will continue to raise my voice for an immediate ceasefire and to end all lives, civilian lives being lost, whatever side of the conflict that they are on. And that went to the press. That was a tough day. The following day, the articles had dropped, again, by just a couple of far-right media outlets with, I think, a bit of an agenda there. And it was a really difficult day because I was making my way to Manchester to commentate on a Scotland-England cricket match, knowing that this smear campaign has hit the press, knowing that I'm taking a lot of abuse on social media. I still walked into the BBC offices and I still got my head into it, and I commentated on the Scotland-England game, and I absolutely loved every moment of it. And the Scottish players performed very, very well that day. Unfortunately, we didn't get to finish the game due to rain interruptions, but it was a great spectacle, and Scotland were very much in a chance of defeating England, and we will never know because it rained. I was very lucky to have support of some people during that. You know, I have only really a couple of people. You know, the likes of Majitak has supported me. Amar Anwar, my legal representative and dear friend, was there to support me. Paul Reddish, great man, great friend of mine, and somebody who fights inequalities every single day, has, along with Amar as well. These type of people I'm blessed to have in my life and call friends. They've been a massive support, and I thank them, because without those people, I don't know how I would have got through those couple of days, as well as family members who were also supporting me as well. I made my way back to Glasgow after that. I had not spoken to Cricket Scotland whatsoever. I never spoke to leadership again after being introduced to the BBC on the matter. They never ever contacted me again. And I came back to Scotland, and the following day I was contacted by the BBC again. This time because a group of influential 100 Jewish leaders had written a letter to the BBC demanding that I was removed from commentating. I then had to respond to that and go through the whole process again. And I actually offered to meet those 100 leaders. I was willing to go and sit in a room with them and to discuss what had taken place, what I had shared, and what my actual views were, because this was being such a narrative spun here that I had this hate towards Jewish people, and I don't, not at all. If you can find on record anything I have said about the Jewish faith, I will retract my statement. I don't think you will. I'm not brought up like that. I'm brought up in a household where I was taught to love and respect every faith, religion, gender, whatever it may be. And religion is very high up on that. I would never disrespect another person's faith. In fact, it's important to say at this point as well, I'm a Muslim that actually married cross-faith. I married a Christian woman. So I guess it just shows how open-minded and respect I have for all faiths. And Jewish faith is no different. So I offered my hand to meet with these people, but they didn't wish to meet. And this narrative was spun for a few days on the media that I was alleged to be anti-Semitic. But the BBC never took me off. I covered all the matches I was due to. I have messages in my phone from leadership in BBC that they thought my commentary was excellent. I came across really, really well. And I was also discussing with them at that point, perhaps other opportunities to get involved in commentary, whether it maybe be in the 100 competition. You know, I was keen to try and maybe get involved in the Women's World Cup as well. But I had a feeling at that point that they just wanted to get me to the end of that stage and then to remove me from there. I hope that wasn't the case. And I'll just confirm this again. If I had have been anti-Semitic, I would have been taken off air before that first game against Scotland or England. No questions asked. But the fact that I wasn't anti-Semitic, perhaps a little bit clumsy, but the fact that I wasn't anti-Semitic, I was kept on air. When the World Cup finished, there was a few stages during the World Cup, which is also interesting. BBC TMS, every time they posted about a game, were tagging all the commentators on the podcast that they were doing. Now, I was doing all of these things as well, commentating on games and then doing a podcast afterwards. I was never getting tagged on social media, to the point that I actually had brought this to the attention of senior BBC leadership and saying, why are you not, tagging me? Is there a reason for this? And it was just ignored. I know why it was. But again, it just shows you how these smear campaigns and these narratives that can be pushed against Muslim people predominantly, you're basically what I was going through was getting to see firsthand how you are silenced by the media. You know, the BBC were doing all they could, and I'll give you the worst of the examples now of the worst they could to try and silence me was after the first game I commentated, there was further bombing in Gaza. And the footage emerged of a hospital being bombed. There was women, children slaughtered. We seen actual beheaded babies and children and parents holding children without their head. And I retweeted that, and I instantly got a message from BBC leadership to say to me, you'd agreed that you would not speak about the Gaza situation while you were commentating on the World Cup. I didn't agree. You were trying to silence me, and you were trying to push me into a corner. And I'm sorry, but no cricket match is more important to me than when you see innocent civilians, children being slaughtered. And I felt sick in my stomach when I got that message. I had actually messaged that senior leader a few days before. They read my message and they completely ignored me. But as soon as I did the retweet showing the atrocities and the bombing that had taken place and the deaths and the killing that was taking place, that was it. A text message straight away. You said you wouldn't talk about this. I responded saying, yeah, I agreed with you that I wouldn't because you were putting pressure on me. But it's very difficult for me to keep quiet when I'm witnessing the atrocities that I'm witnessing. And I felt sick in my stomach that, shouldn't you feel the same way? Do you have any humanity in you? I'm being pulled through this whole experience because I have spoken out against innocent civilians dying, and you're telling me I should keep quiet on that? I don't think that's right. I think that's a massive problem. And what followed after that was, the World Cup campaign finished, and I have had no work from the BBC since. Funny that. I've had conversations. Scottish football was started again. I was covering Scottish football regularly, and it seems to have gone quiet now. I wonder why. Why is that the case? I've not been proven to be anti-Semitic. There's been no criminal charges brought against me. I've never spoken ill against the Jewish faith. So why? Why? Because I raised my voice against the ongoing genocide that's taking place in Palestine. It's all it is. I'm not the only one that's faced this kind of attempt to silence. There's others out there as well. But this is what happens when you speak up for the people of Palestine. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I mean, just even to touch on the First Minister of Scotland, no longer, but Hamza Yusuf. He was the only Western leader that was raising his voice for Palestine. Funnily, his tenure came to an end pretty quickly. I don't know all the details that went on, but I've often wondered why. Because he was clearly having a lot of pressure put on him. And I've experienced some of that pressure as well. And I guess my message to come out of that and speaking here today is that that's not okay, what happened. And I won't be silenced. And I guess I just will never work for BBC if that's the case. If you cannot speak up and raise your voice for the oppressed people of Palestine, then why should I look to try and further my career with them, especially now when I've been cancelled anyway? And just to now confirm, I've been cancelled by the BBC for speaking up for the oppressed Palestinian people, 40,000 people who have been slaughtered and killed so far. I'm sure the number is many, many more than that, many of which are women and children. We've seen actual beheaded babies, parents holding their beheaded children. And because I raised my voice for that, my media career was pretty much squashed before it even started. And that's okay, because one day I'm going to go in my grave, and I would rather go in my grave raising my voice for innocent civilians that have died. Whether they are Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whatever faith that may be. I will continue to raise my voice when such atrocities are taking place. So I guess that's my message to the BBC. I will not be silenced, and I will continue to speak up. As I come towards the end of this recording, something else I want to address is my relationship with Cricket Scotland. So when I came back, things had gone very quiet with Cricket Scotland all of a sudden, and I wasn't having much dialogue with them at all. However, I did speak with senior leadership again. And we, it had come into the discussion that they had mentioned to me about covering the Australia-Scotland games, and I had said, obviously, that I'm still keen to do that. And I also, when their strategic plan came out, messaged some questions about the strategic plan that had come out and some areas that I maybe wanted to understand more, or I felt they could have addressed more in their strategic plan. That was the last time I heard from Cricket Scotland leadership for the following 7 weeks. The Australia games came and gone. Some of the alleged people were welcomed back with open arms into the Grange, whilst real victims were completely sidelined from the event. I had also, 7 weeks prior or so, this is when I was still trying to work with Cricket Scotland, I was approached by someone to ask that if I would make an introduction to Cricket Scotland about sponsoring the Muslim Business Awards, sporting award that was taking place that year. I did make that introduction with good intentions, that I think it's a good idea for Cricket Scotland to be going out and connecting with other communities, not just the Muslim community, the Hindu community, the Sikh community, the Jewish community, whatever communities. I would like to see cricket. It's good. It's good to go and connect with all these different communities. And that was a start. And it just happened to be the Muslim community who had approached me to make that introduction. I made that introduction, but what followed in regards to the treatment towards all the victims of this and the way the whole referral process was dealt with, when it came to near the awards, after being completely sidelined and ignored by Cricket Scotland leadership for 7 or 8 weeks now, I was contacted and invited to the Scottish Muslim Business Awards as Cricket Scotland's guest. to be at their table. Majid Haq was also invited to be part of that table. And we felt that it just was not the right time. We felt like they haven't addressed the issues. They haven't given anyone closure in this. They haven't put in the hard yards towards this. And they literally want us to come and sit in an event with them, get some pictures taken, and all will be well. Therefore, we declined the invite and declined to go to the event. And Cricket Scotland did proceed and sponsored that event. And I think it's good that they did do that. And I hope they had some good conversations and made some good connections during that event. But it certainly wasn't the right time for us to sit at the table with them. I hope one day we can be talking about it differently. But as I come towards the end of this recording, I want to take the opportunity to just say, I still only wish positive things to come in the future where everybody can thrive equally in Scottish cricket, in Scottish sports, and in society in general. That is what I seek. And I also continue and pray and wish for peace around the world and for no civilians, innocent civilians, to be killed and slaughtered, no matter what their background or faith. But at this moment in time, what we are seeing taking place in Gaza is not okay. It is hell on earth, and innocent civilians are dying by the day. And I urge world leaders, and I urge humanity and those in positions of power, just like at Cricket Scotland and leadership as well, have influence and put a stop to this. The Prime Minister of the UK, put a stop to this. Stop providing arms towards these atrocities being committed. Let's get a ceasefire. Too many innocent lives have already been lost and they will never come back. But we cannot continue to lose innocent civilians, and that's where my pain comes from, and that's the hope that I have, that it comes to an end once and for all. I've said a lot in this recording today. It's been really quite difficult to speak about a lot of this stuff. There, I'm sure, will be things that I've missed out that I wanted to say, but I've done my best to get across what I wanted to say. And I really hope that one day, in 2 or 3 years' time, I can do something similar and be talking about how things have changed for the better in the world and in sport in Scotland and in society when it comes to issues of racism and hate. And no hate is okay against anybody. And that's my firm belief. Thank you very much for listening, and hope to do some more recordings in future.